Yeah, talk a bit about the Colts and talk about what's happening over there.
Yeah, so they went to Joe Flacco 2 weeks ago, and that was a product of a couple of things. One, they just weren't efficient offensively. There was the strange situation where Anthony Richardson literally taps out of that game because he was gassed. What I was told at the time was Anthony Richardson needed a breath, whether that's mentally, physically, emotionally. He just needed to have something of a reset. Obviously, they had seen Joe Flacco playing at a high level to that point in the season when he'd gotten onto the field. Their passing game had been more consistent. So Flacco gets his first start Sunday Night Football against the Vikings, against a really tough opponent on the road, tough environment. Brian Flores calling plays. Doesn't go great. And then last week, the pick six right out of the gate, and the Colts are in the early hole. Even though Shane Steichen went to the podium on Monday and said, Joe Flacco's the guy until I say otherwise, Joe Flacco's the guy moving forward, it probably shouldn't shock anybody that, at that time, he already was thinking we may have to switch back to Anthony Richardson. So the hope here is that for a guy who was drafted fourth overall, who had not played a ton of football, who is still one of the youngest quarterbacks in the NFL, Bob, he's 22 years old, that this was kind of a, wake up call a little bit. We gotta grow up a bit. He wasn't doing anything wrong per se, but there's a youth to him and maybe a naivete where all those extra things. It's not just a matter of being a great preparer, it's being the best. Those are the things they were hoping sitting back for a couple of weeks with Joe Flacco starting was going to bring him. They're optimistic that he did learn some things. They would have loved if Joe Flacco and the Colts had won those games, and then we're not even having this discussion. But Anthony Richardson, even though it's very inconsistent, lowest completion percentage, all that stuff, he's got one or two plays every game. We were like, holy cow, they can harness that. This guy's got a chance. We'll see in a second opportunity whether he's able to take those steps forward.
A couple human questions based on this circumstances. One, Joe Flacco, like how does he feel about being benched again? Did he know his role is just to be the stopgap? I mean, he played great with the Browns. Wasn't expected to really be the quarterback for the Browns, but then does and plays wonderfully. Then was with the Colts this year, not as great of a season. But does he get upset when he gets benched, or does he from the very beginning know his role? And the second part of the human question is like, how does the locker room feel about Anthony Richardson in general?
Joe Flacco is, he's seen it all. He's 40 years old. He was drafted back in '08. This is a guy who's won a Super Bowl, been the highest paid player in the NFL twice. Yet for a large chunk of his career in Baltimore, he was a bit of a punchline. It was just Joe Flacco because he's, I think, this big, kind of gangly looking, immobile guy. People just wanted to, poke holes in him, but he's highly accomplished within the league. Nobody signed him last year. The guy's on his couch in November. The Browns, he was the fifth different or the fourth or fifth different starting quarterback the Browns had last year. Nobody was signing him. And then he goes on that run last year. He plays well down the stretch. He's still got, and one coach that I really trust in the league always describes it this way with Joe Flacco. He's got arm twitch. In other words, not only is he seeing the field and processing quickly, but the way he can still get the ball out, even though he doesn't move really great, he can get the football out really quickly. That part of his game is still there, but nobody was signing him this offseason. The Browns weren't re-signing him. Part of that was, I'm sure, that they didn't want calls for Joe Flacco the moment that Deshaun Watson struggled. In the end, maybe the Browns would have liked Joe Flacco to be there based upon how their season went. But for Joe Flacco, he knows this is results based. He knows he's not anybody's long term solution as long as he wants to play in the NFL. This is probably his role. Most backup quarterbacks, Bobby, if you look across the NFL over the course of time, you're happy if you can go 500 with those guys. There's not a lot of times. Yeah, Nick Foles had a great run with the Eagles, Flacco last season when he came in, but those stories are few and far between. You're just hoping somebody can get you back to your starting quarterback. Flacco had his opportunity. They lost a couple of games. And with regard to the locker room and Anthony Richardson, everybody wants the same thing. Everybody there wants to have a team that's winning, a team that is productive, that's making big plays, and it's fun to be on the field. They're not out of it. Look at the standings right now. The AFC South is wide open, especially with the Texans stumbling of late here. I anticipate fully that they are going to rally around Anthony Richardson, and they're going to hope, again, that this wake-up call for him over the last couple of weeks brings back a guy who maybe takes, even if it's baby steps toward making the most of his God-given abilities.
I want to stay internally and even just speculate internally with the Bears. They just fired Waldron, the offensive coordinator. I don't know, if any of those guys are going to be around next year, but How do you feel Caleb Williams is being received by his teammates? I mean, we've seen people walk off the field. Maybe he had an injury, but like, what's happening there with Caleb Williams in Chicago?
I think it's hard, Bobby, to fully evaluate, anything that's going on with surrounding specifically Caleb Williams because the whole thing hasn't looked very good. DJ Moore, who's got a great reputation as a locker room guy, as a person, he's been the one throwing his helmet. He's the one, as you referenced, who in the middle of a play, I've never seen that before. He tweaks something, but walks off the field and is sitting on the bench while Caleb Williams is still scrambling around. These are unusual types of things. I think that there were probably unrealistic expectations, quite honestly, for how quickly the Bears were going to play at a high level this season because they went and they signed DeAndre Swift and they traded for Keenan Allen and they drafted Rome Odunze. The defense was playing great. Everybody looked at them like, hey, they should be challenging in the division. The reality is, coming from that air raid derivative scheme that Caleb Williams played in with Lincoln Riley, and specifically in 2023, when USC's receivers and their offensive line weren't very good, if you watch his highlight reel, almost everything is off schedule, hero ball, throwing off balance, running around outside the pocket. It's hard to live like that in the NFL. And so there was a lot that Caleb Williams was going to have to learn in terms of playing within the scope of an offense and playing within rhythm. I've known Shane Waldron for a long time. He trained under Bill Belichick, Sean McVay, Pete Carroll. All those guys trusted him on staff. He was the OC the last 2 years with Pete in Seattle. He's a very smart guy. He's a good football coach. He's a great dude. But he is a personality that, if not introverted, he's at minimum introspective and intellectual. He is not going to be a high energy, in your face type of guy. Some of the stuff you've been hearing from players, both what was leaked out early in the season and what guys like Keenan Allen said yesterday, is, well, he didn't coach us hard enough. He let some things slide. He was too nice of a guy. That's Shane. And that works with certain players, with certain groups of players. Obviously, with this one, they want to be coached differently. They now have a guy in Thomas Brown coming in, who I also have known for a number of years. He's a former NFL player. He is going to be high energy and have a ton of juice. It's a different personality. Is that going to make a difference? It's the same playbook. It's the same players on the field. Sometimes, at least short term, there's a placebo effect, and people can feel like, well, this is different. This gives us a chance here. But in terms of the big picture, you nailed it. What happens these last 8 games is certainly going to influence where things go from here for the Bears coaching staff, for the Bears organization. The one thing that I can sit here and confidently tell you is the Bears believe in Caleb Williams. They want Caleb Williams to be the guy. They're trying to build a stadium. Caleb is a big piece of that. They've got to get this thing right, and they'll continue to tweak things until they do that.
I was watching Aaron Rodgers, I guess after practice yesterday, and they'd asked him, "Hey, do you want to come back?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think I do." Well, whatever his little answer was there. Like, do we believe he will come back? Do we believe he even thinks he's going to come back, or is he just doing like Aaron Rodgers' extension of care about me content?
It was interesting because Aaron, for all the times that he kind of mused about retirement late in his days in Green Bay and at one point threatened retirement because he was fed up with the Packers organization. Then they paid him on a big contract after another MVP season. Things seemed fine for like another year, and then he ends up getting traded to the Jets. Over time, and even while, he played 4 snaps last season before he tore the Achilles, but there were interviews with him because he goes on the Pat McAfee show every week. And it was like, yeah, I think I want to play multiple seasons. I'd like to play 3 seasons. It started to extend. Then all of a sudden the losses start to mount again. And now we're back to, I think I want to play in 2025. Quite honestly, this is the first time, or at least the most degree to which Aaron Rodgers has not necessarily been in control of his future. There's real questions. They already fired Robert Saleh. His good friend Nathaniel Hackett is not calling plays anymore for the Jets. He's under contract with New York, but do the Jets want him back? Under what circumstances do they want him back? Who would the coaches be on that team? Does he really want to go and start over someplace else and have to go through this same process of trying to get some of his people in and learn new teammates? These are real questions, and it's going to be dictated in part by who they end up hiring. There's questions just about the head coach hiring process that they're going to go through because Donald Trump was just reelected, and that means Woody Johnson the owner could be headed for an ambassadorship, and so it could be his brother Christopher running the process. It's wild to think about like these massive world issues that impact professional football, but they're real things, and they definitely also, potentially bear on the future of a guy who has dabbled a little bit in politics himself in Aaron Rodgers. I'm sure he's got a million other things in this life that he wants to do. But I would tell you this, Bobby, if he had thought there was a 1% chance that the 2024 season went like this in New York, I don't believe he would have come back for this year. I look at him taking hits like he did the play after last week when there's a third down pass for Devontae Adams in the end zone. It gets tipped and it falls incomplete. Fourth down, he's trying to do an old school Aaron Rodgers thing, scrambling around, buying time outside, inside the pocket, and he gets blasted. And he goes down in like the chalk outline pose on the ground. And all I'm thinking watching this is somebody who's covered Aaron since my days back at the Green Bay Press Gazette is he's got to be laying there going, what am I doing? Well, why am I? I've made all the money. I've won 4 MVPs. I've won. Why am I out here getting my butt kicked on a bad team right now? I would anticipate he's going to, step back after the season, evaluate what's best for him, but also evaluate the landscape. And the Jets are going to be doing the same thing.
All right, final 3 questions. I want to go to coaching. I just want to ask about Belichick. Do you think he'll be back next year?
He'd like to be. Bill Belichick, despite the fact that has he done your show, Bobby? Has he been here on
He
the
has not.
podcast?
He has not been on our show yet.
You're the last show, I think,
Which
in
is
the
why
US
we
that
haven't
does
gone
not have.
after him.
So
Yeah, we're not going at. Has he been offered? It's different than has he been on. We love Coach, but yes,
I'm just saying he's everywhere in the media game, but I can tell you he is doing things on a daily basis all the time to prepare to return. He is staying up to speed on game tape. He's staying up to speed on staffing. He's talking to people. He's evaluating potential coaching openings. He intends to be back. What'll be interesting to see with Belichick is what opportunities present themselves and are they the ones that he would want? He's going to be selective. He's not going to go to a total teardown rebuild with no resources, no quarterback. I don't know that he really would want to go, to the West Coast even, just based on, where he's at in his life and where his family's located. One of his sons is obviously out at the University of Washington, but a lot of his family's on the East Coast. Those are all questions he'll have to evaluate here. The other piece of this is, for Bill and for Mike Vrabel and for Brian Flores, among others, there's real questions based on the hiring process a year ago of do owners still want to hire people from negative reinforcement cultures? There's a lot of enthusiasm right now about the Dan Campbells of the world and the D'Amico Ryans and these coaches who it's positive energy all the time and they want everyone to be a part of it, as opposed to like the football god archetype where it's Bill Belichick, everyone answers to him, don't question him, he's on top. I believe Bill at this point knows probably some, things that maybe he would do differently from his days in New England. I think he's more meldable to working with different people, but it's still, he knows one way to coach, which is always to point out the things that we could do better. This generation of players, does that get through? Right now we're seeing some of the guys like Dan Quinn, who have been that positive reinforcement guy for a long time, having success. Does that impact the hiring trends, or do people go, Bill Belichick's won more games than almost everybody in NFL history. What are we? We're going to hire some 35-year-old 1-year offensive coordinator, or are we going to hire Bill? If you're close, if you think that you're not that far away and you got the resources in place, maybe it's a fit.
2 questions left, and I'll spin off that. If the Cowboys make a coaching change, which it seems inevitable they will, would Jerry Jones hire someone like a Vrabel or a Belichick, a big personality coach? He doesn't have long left to live. That's a morbid thing to say, but does he finally give up on having somebody he can control?
Well, I think also, does Jerry want to start over? Mike McCarthy's contract's up. So one way or another, Mike and the Cowboys are going to have decisions to make at the end of this thing. If you bring in, for instance, a Belichick, Bill's history, and again, I think he's more meldable on this, but Bill's history has been you set up a program a certain way, and you're probably going to go down before you go up. The Cowboys won 12 games each of the last 3 seasons. This season, for a variety of different reasons, including not paying CeeDee Lamb till the last second, including not paying Dak until the end, a bunch of different injuries here. There have been circumstances. Does Jerry believe bringing in a Belichick is going to help him win right away? Whatever he thinks can get them put one more trophy in the case, I believe, to your point, that's what Jerry's going to want to do. Having said that, the idea of Bill Belichick being the head coach of the Cowboys, and after a game, he walks to the podium and he wants to give his usual 3-word answers, and someone's like, "Yeah, Jerry's out in the hall questioning that third down defense you called there. What do you think?" Bill's head would explode. I can't imagine that he'd want to be in that type of an environment. But if that's if that's the best place and if they can figure it out, hey, we're just going to make our egos come together for the next couple of years. You rule nothing out. I don't personally believe that's a great fit for anybody involved, but until the Cowboys figure out what their plan for 2025, anything's possible.
Last question, and I know you're a Minnesota guy. What's up with JJ McCarthy? Obviously not playing injured, but what's the future there at quarterback in Minnesota?
Well, the first thing you got to ask yourself is, JJ McCarthy's health, because he did have the additional procedure. They called it a biologic injection, which I think gives people a bunch of like images of aliens and stuff. No, it's common treatments, PRP and things that they do to promote healing. He had some swelling when he was going through his rehab, as they kind of were increasing the load on the knee that he had the meniscus repaired in. My understanding is pretty minor procedure, no impact on the timeline, should be back for 2025. Flip side of that, Sam Darnold, even though we've seen a little more of the bad Sam Darnold here in recent weeks, he's still played by and large at a high level. And I would think, there's really no precedent for a rookie quarterback to miss an entire season because of injury. There have been guys who have sat, but that's a whole year of reps that JJ McCarthy is missing out on. Even though Kevin O'Connell said like 2 days after he got hurt, we've seen enough. We know JJ is going to be our quarterback of the future. I don't take that to mean he's going to be QB1 and we're just going to have some young backup or, the Joe Flacco's of the world behind him. I think you have to go into 2025 with another plan, if for no other reason than to ease the pressure on JJ McCarthy as he's coming off of a major surgery to get back and up and running quickly here. So what's it going to cost if Sam Darnold is that guy? And I would certainly think, again, if he's given the opportunity, hey, you're going to come in here, you're going to be the guy at the front of the line. We're planning on you starting until JJ's ready. I would think Sam Darnold would love to be back. Is that something in the neighborhood of, is it the Baker Mayfield contract from 2 years ago, which was 1 year, $5 million? It's kind of like Darnold's deal. I think is 1 year, $10 million this year. Or is it closer to the Baker Mayfield deal he got this past March after 1 year in Tampa, which was 3 years for 75? It's probably the latter. There's not enough quarterbacks in the league. Are the Vikings willing to spend that type of money to bring Darnold back? I would certainly think that they have a plan for it. JJ McCarthy is the future in Minnesota. Does that future mean week 1 of 2025? TBD.
We were talking about before you came on how good a job you do on NFL Network. You guys do a great job on that show. So congratulations on that. You do an awesome filling in for Rich Eisen when he's gone. Like, you're like the only guest host on any podcast I listen to that I will actually listen to. Mostly I'm like, I listen to a podcast for the person, but when you're on, you kill it. And you guys, we'll put his social handles down in the notes as well. Tom, thank you for the time, man. I'm a massive fan. You know more than anybody else, period, in football. And we're so happy you spent some time with us, man. Thank you.
Well, Bobby, next time you're making an album or a TV show or writing a book or one of your many other projects, you need to fill in on the Bobby Bones podcast.
It's you.
You know who to come to.
It is you. All right, Tom. See you, buddy.